Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Marcus Miller. I'm the director here at Gordon Snellgrove Gallery. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Curtis Santiago and Magdalyn Asimakis.
That was great.
I just want to say that the exhibition that's up now is not looking its best. Please come back tomorrow night. There's a reception here at the gallery for Risa Gunderson. And there, of course, there's also receptions down at AKA and Paved. And of course, there's the reception for at the college galleries for Curtis Santiago. First, I'll introduce Magdalyn, who's the curator of this show. Magdalyn is an independent curator based in Toronto and New York City. She's worked at the Art Gallery of Ontario, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Wedge Curatorial Projects, which is in Toronto, and that's a non-profit organization that's devoted to Black identity and contemporary art, is what I do. She has an MA in Art History from U of Vic. She was the 2016 Helena Rubinstein Curatorial Fellow at the Whitney Museum of Independent Study Program. And she's just now embarking on a PhD at Queen's University, and her focus there is going to be on modern and contemporary art history. She's curated Jean-Michel Basquiat, Now's the Time at the AGO, and her recent exhibit, I think that just came down at the kitchen, that I am reading backwards and into for a purpose to go on. And there's also a book that accompanies that. We curated this exhibit, and the book is coming out, is published by Whitney. And of course, this exhibition, which is touring on Curtis Santiago. And I believe there's a book coming out there as well, possibly, published by the college art galleries I read, or who knows, right?
There's a takeaway.
There's a takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It'll be available in the gallery.
All right. Curtis Santiago, and I've just had the pleasure of meeting both of these lovely people over the past couple of days. As a Canadian artist, he's from Sherwood Park, just outside of Edmonton, and based in Toronto, and most recently, he's been living in New York, where he may stay or move to Lisbon, depending on what the future may bring. His work is painting, performance, and what I'd call intimate sculpture. And maybe, I'm sure we're going to hear more about that as this conversation goes on. Curtis has been to the Emily Carr College of Art and Design University, New York Studio School, and he apprenticed with Lawrence Paul Uxwelpton. Thank you. I've got that to say again, and maybe you're going to have to help me one more time.
No problem. No problem.
He's had a really successful career, actually, as a musician, and there's a Wikipedia page up on him. And you maybe didn't want me to get into it, but really, I think it's one of the very interesting things about you. And on that page, it has Curtis listed as dance rock, soul, and he was with a group called the Hyphonics, and he was a club DJ as well. But it was in 2014, really, where his CV really starts to get jam-packed with art exhibitions. And he's shown all over the place at the Art Gallery of Ontario, Art Gallery of Mississauga, Studio Museum in Harlem, Perez Museum, the Museum of Capitalism, which I had never heard of before.
Yeah, it just opened up. Yeah.
Museum of Capitalism, Hunter College, Savannah College of Art and Design. This year he's going to be included in the exhibition Triggered at the New Museum in New York, and Sightlines Biennial in Santa Fe. If you ask Curtis about his education, he'd probably say that the apprenticeship that he did with Lawrence Paul Uxwelpton was probably most formative. Now, he may disagree with me, but maybe that'll come out later, because I think that his trajectory into the art world has been unusual by our standards, and quite interesting. Also, his admiration for Jean-Michel Basquiat was has been an inspiration for him, and also I think what brought these two people together. So thank you very much, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thank you. It's very generous introductions. I don't know, we could start by talking about how this exhibition started?
How did this exhibition start?
Well, okay. So,
Like starting with the 2 years ago? Or how?
sure.
Okay. So Magdalyn and I met in Toronto working on the Jean-Michel Basquiat exhibition at the AGO. And it was as simple as we were placed in the same group when the first meeting of artists, academics, and social activists, and the AGO staff, we wanted to brainstorm how to bring an exhibition dealing with prominent artists of color to Toronto and make it something very inclusive. And we were placed in the same group together. And we both had this mutual love for JMB. And after after the Jean-Michel Basquiat show, through that exhibition, the people at the AGO became familiar with my work. And I was having a hard time showing in Toronto because the work I was making was a little unorthodox, and I heard a lot of no's from galleries, that these weren't art objects, that these were kind of gimmicky, they were this, they were that, but she saw something in them, and a few other...
The ring boxes.
Yes, the ring boxes, I'm sorry, yeah. Small, the intimate sculptures. And she and a few other people said, just hold the course, there's something there. And she came up with the idea of presenting an exhibition of my work at a convenience store. It was an old convenience store that had been kind of converted and used as a gallery space in an area of Toronto that is under a lot of gentrification, Parkdale, which is an area that is like, when I first moved there was a lot of Turkish immigrants, Estonian immigrants, and just people from all over the world. And it was a down and out area, a lot of drug use, and just like a rougher area. And there's this convenience store that takes place right on where the main bus kind of drops off people into that community. And she came up with the idea, well, why don't we just present your works in this display in the front, and elevated the works and made it look like almost like a jewelry store. The boxes were illuminated, and at nighttime they would just glow, and you could see them from. And we'd have people get off the bus and be like, "What's this?" And we're like, "Oh, it's an art show." And it was a new experience for that community. And we just kind of at that point we were like, no one knows my work better than she does, and she seems to have a vested interest in my progression. And so we've just been building 2 years from that point till now, working on various exhibitions. Our launching point was that I was in Toronto and nothing was happening for me in terms of sales. Now, sales doesn't determine how successful you are as an artist or how good your art is. It's just something that if you're trying to make a living off your work, you gotta sell something in order to buy more paint. And it was not happening in Toronto for me, for whatever reasons. And that's not the case. Some of my friends do well there. And I think it's important for artists to and especially Canadian artists, to talk about how you make a sale, or how the sale went, or how much your work is selling for, and things like that. And so we did an exhibition, and you can stop me if I'm going too fast or too far. I realized that nothing was happening for me in Toronto, and we had an opportunity to show in the Spring Break Art Fair, and that takes place in February, and it's the art fair during Armory Week that's wild and outside. It took place in an old post office in New York, and it was just like, how many artists? Like 200 artists in this art fair. And I had taken the same show that I'd had in Toronto, and we presented it there, and we sold everything, and the ball of momentum. And the first piece was purchased by the director of the Brooklyn Museum, and it was a drawing, and it was the first time I'd ever shown a drawing, because Magdalyn had come by the studio and was like, you need to show this. And I didn't think it was ready. I was very shy about my drawings and things like that, and we sold that work and a bunch of other works, and then the ball of momentum just started rolling. So that CV that we were speaking about, everything just kind of springboarded off that point to right now, where I was able to gain a major residency in New York and had 7 months to just produce. And what changed it for me for that, and again, stop me if I'm going too far or saying too much. All right. What changed it for me was the access to free art supplies. So they have this place called Material for the Arts in New York, and it's like you go there and there's bolts of fabric, there's a trillion buttons. It's that kind of thing. Like TV shows, Martha Stewart goes off air and she has all these TV screens. They donate them to the space. So when I went to the space, there was a stack of Arches paper, like stacks of it. And so I took about 400 sheets, and in that 7-month drawing, I went through 7 months residency. I went through all 400 drawings, and a lot of those drawings will be in my exhibition, and that's kind of where I'm going to stop because I'm a little lost.
Well, I'll say something too about like the maybe the concept behind this exhibition too, which was like when we did that exhibition in New York, which was 1 week long, very short and very small and very low budget, is when actually Leah came through,
Yes.
curator at the College Art Galleries, and then she and I started chatting about Curtis's work after that was down, and continued our conversations about it. And I guess that coincided with what you're saying too, this kind of access to material, which is major. I mean, like, I think that is a huge platform for artists in New York too, like being able to access materials for free, like to go and be able to pick up 400 sheets of paper, which is not a small thing, is really such a great platform for like production, creative production, and puts less pressure on it too. You could just
Less
kind
precious.
of experiment a little
Yeah.
bit. Anyway, so this is so in conjunction with this, like we were talking about potentially doing an exhibition here, and Curtis's practice was expanding into drawing, and a lot of other things, different types of sculpture, different kind of series of the ring boxes, but also drawings, and that was also the time, and this kind of feeds into the concept of the exhibition, which is that you were moving around a lot. So you were going, and that's something we highlighted too. You know, you were in various parts of the United States, of Europe, you went to South Africa, you went to Trinidad, you cameoed back in Canada too. Like, you know, and it's like, and it was so interesting to me because every time you would go into a different place, like a new area of the work would like expand or develop, or a different style would emerge. And so in the exhibition that's here, I was trying to work with Curtis to convey that and convey what it means to be an artist who moves around, and that being something, and tying it, and you know, and even tying it into Stuart Hall and what he says about the diaspora experience, and kind of trying to like locate in spaces in between, and so I thought it might be good, I don't know if you're up for this, to maybe talk about different series that you've done that are reflected in the exhibition, and kind of what it meant for you, and or maybe you could talk about also like, because I'm really interested in how your work expands, and like I know that if you move cities,
How it's going to change.
that something's going to change,
Yeah.
and including now here in Saskatoon,
Completely.
because you came a week earlier than me, and the gallery, the university was very generous to give him some space, and now he's made a bunch of new works here, which are different than other works he's made. So I don't know, do you want to talk about what your instinct is with?
Sure. Part of it is that I can't. I've discovered from traveling. Like I started painting in South Africa, and I arrive in Oakland, and I start trying to. I can't go back into old work. I'm very about the energy of the space that I'm in. That's something I pulled from Lawrence. Lawrence has done quite well, and he could move to New York, and he could move to LA, he could move anywhere. His family and his children are in Vancouver, which is a part of his ancestral connection, is important in his work, and the land. The land is where he's from, definitely affects that. So I always took that as, wherever I went, I felt like I had to respond to what was the setting, and I was in pop music for a long time, and we'd like go into a studio, and the producer would start on the beat, and then the bass player would come and do the thing, and it was just like this formula. And I wanted to make sure that I never have a formula, a way into a drawing. At this point, my red face spray paint that may pop up there, the circular face, is like the only starting point that I can enter into something with, but everything else is going to always be trying to conjure up something fresh, because from Jean Michel, I took that we still haven't even seen like, they say like how much, like 80% of his work, some
Yeah.
craziness like that.
They're
And every
like
time I see
tiny,
it painting
tiny
from Jean-Michel, it's like I've never seen it before. It was something new, and that was something I wanted to try, not force, but just allow intuition to kind of dictate what happens in the moment. Because some places I can't get the spray paint I like, the colors. South Africa, I couldn't get this one color that I really, really resonate with. So then I was like, okay, well, let's not force it. Let's come up with something else. There was rocks. There was other things I could use. Yeah. And also just time. It's like I can't use, if I'm only going to be in a city for 10 days, I can only go so thick with my oils. I can only, that is a factor in what plays out when I'm making.
Yeah, that's why specificity is so interesting too, and especially as you say, like with materials, like what's available to you, and then what you create in those spaces out of what's available. It's a nice kind of meaningful resourcefulness that adds like a certain authenticity to that site specificity. And I mean, what does it? Did you like? What does it mean for you to like make something here in Saskatoon, for example? Because you hadn't been back to it.
I hadn't been in prairies in
Yeah.
almost over 10 years. What it meant for me to be in Saskatoon, well, first and foremost, this has been one of the best experiences with an institution. And this isn't like, you know, when a band's on stage being like, all right, Cleveland, you know, like, no, like, I arrived and immediately the university put me in position to make something possible. There wasn't any, okay, well, I need to get some supplies. All right, we're gonna send an email, and then we're gonna get a letter, and then a check's gonna get cut, and then, you know, it was instant. So it felt very comfortable being able to just step in. There's something about the prairies and the kindness of the people. There was so much that I was just like so thankful for. Just the peace and serenity of the space allowed me to really explore, and again, giving free reign of the facility was phenomenal. And so it really allowed me to go bigger than I'd ever gone. And traveling a lot has changed my idea of the finished work. I was talking to someone last night over dinner about seeing there's a gallery that I really used to enjoy, and they still show great artists, The Hole in New York. It's a certain style of painting that they use. And when I was looking on Instagram recently I'm like, why don't I follow The Hole anymore? Because I've gotten rid of the idea of the finished product. The like wrapping this painting up in a tight bow that when I look back it looks slick and it looks like a poster. I'm at a point right now where I want it to almost feel like those drawn mazes that just isn't quite complete. Maybe you can enter this way only because there's nothing there. Allowing time is my end. Today is my last day to draw, to do anything on the drawing, and after that, for me, it's complete. It's a true record of the amount of time I had here and my experiences here, and it allows me to make an error and just live with that error, whatever that is. That's no longer an error, it's the result. Using materials that I can't erase. I saw a Picasso drawing that they had in like the Gagosian, and this massive, beautiful work, and then behind it I could see all his paint his like, oh, he made the face wrong. Oh, he did that. And that for me now, the unfinished show that they had at the Met Brouwer, where you're looking at an unfinished Titian, you're looking at an unfinished de Kooning, I love those. I was just like, yeah, that for me, that's where image making is really pleasing for me. And so, yeah.
No, I think it's meaningful too, because as like a curator too, and I've worked I'm independent, but I've also worked institutionally too, and I understand the kind of challenges that are involved with like making space for an artist, like in the space where the work will be displayed. And I think it's actually amazing. I mean, I'm just very interested in this is very nerdy actually. I may regret saying this, but I just am very interested in bureaucracy and structure and how you can kind of tinker with it a little bit so that you can make space for creativity. Because oftentimes, if we're always doing the same thing over and over again and installing in the same way and working with artists in the same way, then it kind of hinder creativity.
Builds that pop music formula that.
Well, that's right, exactly. So I think that was important, and it's important to the exhibition concept too, because you are coming to a new space now, and you can continue that pattern of a different kind of production according to where you are. So that's great. So I'm just going to ask you. I feel like I'm on a talk show, so I'm just going to keep asking questions. Actually, I wanted to ask how the ancestor series began, like the red faces.
Okay, the red faces is there's a drawing in the all-black room. So that red, I think it's this drawing here. This was one of the first red face drawings, and it's inspired by I'm of Trinidadian descent, and I grew up in Sherwood Park in Edmonton area. And when I went to Trinidad for the first time, it was during Carnival, and there's a celebration that happens called Juve. And my grandma at the time must have been about like, she was maybe 75 in her 80s, and she was like small and frail, and that's when I got off the plane and saw them. That's what she looked like, and all my relatives looked like what they looked like. But then the Juve celebration came, and it's as the sun is rising and people cover themselves with red mud. And my grandma all of a sudden transformed into this dancing, moving character, and I'm just like, and I just remember the glow of the sun coming up and the glow of these red faces. And so when I found this paint, I was like, oh my God, this triggered the memory of that red paint, of that red mud and the red faces. This is, so whenever I do a red face, it's because I can only go so far back in the books in Trinidad to find out who my great-great-great-great-grandfather is. I'll never know. Due to slavery and the diaspora and how it moved, I can't go back to certain parts of my ancestry. But there's an artist, Nep Sidhu, who's out of Toronto, incredible artist. His father came to me, we were in a show together, and I made a piece, and he came over and he's like, in a diorama, he's like, you're trying to communicate with your ancestors. And I said, yeah, and he's like, all you have to do is call out to them. I'm from a culture where we believe we can communicate forward and backwards with our ancestors. So if that's what you're trying to do, keep that in mind while you're drawing. And so sometimes on my red faces, they have a very European nose, because my great-grandfather was a white French guy. And it took a South African friend to see a photo of me one day and said, oh, you look like your great-grandfather. I was like, what are you talking about? And the way my hair was wavy, there was something about it, and she was like, you look like the French one. And that stuck with me. So that allowed me, when I'm in this process of just, I'm working from intuition, I don't have studies, to make these faces that in my imagination, in my mind, in my heart, in my being, my soul, whatever, feels connected to my ancestry. So I can play with race and gender and all these things through just this red circle. Often the red circle, some of them are androgynous and you don't know. And I really enjoy that aspect. So that's where the red faces came from.
Okay. I didn't know that ended up here.
Oh yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I think because you're like always, and like the kind of thing that I was interested in when I wrote about in this book, that was just the thinking about the past all the time, which is something that you've been doing through the ring boxes for sure. I mean, the kind of mobility of the ring boxes, the opening and closing, which they're built to open and close and be mobile, and how that can mimic like the movement of narratives and the movement of people, and the maintenance of also tradition and so another question I had is how, like, where does imagination factor into your work? Because I'm fascinated by how kind of imaginary ideas or fictional, let's say, narratives collide with true narratives, and that's a way of kind of coming closer to a truth that you don't know. And in your search for like an ancestral past to like, I'm interested too in how, I don't know, I heard Gayatri Spivak speak once, and she said that you can't empathize truly with people that you aren't, but you can imagine, you can try your hardest to imagine that experience, and that will teach you more, to use your imagination. So, so I'm just wondering how that works with, especially with the more complicated drawings that you do that have multiple people in them and have multiple references in them.
It's sometimes like, well, I was fortunate enough growing up, I had the same best friend from play school all the way till the time we went into like high schools when we divided, because my parents wouldn't let me go to an art school, and his parents let him go to Vic Comp in Edmonton. And we would play with G.I. Joes for hours. We had these characters that had their own story, but like once you're past, okay, he's a doctor, we know he's a doctor, so that's the role you're gonna play, everything was left to imagination. And I always wanted to bring that through whatever I was working. Just that feeling of being free to explore whatever I wanted to. In a time where identity politics is playing heavy into art, and for people, artists of color, a lot of institutions and a lot of galleries are expecting you to make work that solely deals with your issues that you face. I found being able to play with imagination where I can take a character from history who's been forgotten or painted over or has been whitewashed. Like, I'm into the medieval period right now, the image of people of color from the medieval period, because a lot of knights were of color, but they've had their paintings changed over, like Saint Maurice, who's from Thebes, still in German painting in a certain period of time, he's painted as a white guy. And so I just thought, well, if they can, these artists could imagine, why can't I imagine? They take some truth, but then, so then everything's confused and force people to be like, well, what's really up? Let me do my research and find out what is really up. But first and foremost, it always comes down to play. I'm like, artists can be it can be very hard, it can be frustrating, but I've worked in a job where I thought that when I got home, I don't want to go up, I don't want to wake up, what am I doing? And now that I'm in a position where I can live my dream, it just has to be fun, and it has to be playful. The work can be serious. Talking about genocide and things like that is not, it's not fun work, but the experience while I'm making the work, it's got to be a balance of I'm playing with these materials to hopefully get to this result that isn't so nice.
So that's really interesting. And how do you, so it's an interesting tension between what you're saying about the continued interest in identity politics that has its own kind of shape right now and look right now. There are a lot of contemporary art tricks that are happening with people that are playing into kind of languages that other people are playing into, and you're trying to avoid that, and at the same time, looking deeply at your history and hugely interested in your past, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that interest in the past and how you try to kind of discuss it in a way that's kind of avoiding the cliche looks at identity politics and trying to find something meaningful and productive.
I think sometimes when there's bombs dropping outside the window and you're inside painting flowers, that's an act of not only self-care, but it's almost like an FU to the things you can't control. I know black bodies are being killed daily by American police. I've had my moments with American police officers. I was making that work in 2014, and now I don't want to represent another dead black body, another body of color, another woman being objectified, I don't want to do that in my work. So the way to do that is just to run in the opposite direction. And it's like, yes, I'm looking at identity through the medieval period, but the paintings are fantasy, And it's sometimes the people are purple and blue and all these different colors and things like that. But the idea of the past is just, again, when they think about trauma and whatnot, and memories are stored in our DNA, and it can be passed down from generations. I'm just trying to uncover the things that I sort of feel intuitively, or that I'm just trying to sort that out in my head in a way that makes sense to me, and a way that I can then have some peace about why do I feel uncomfortable in these situations, or why do I this. It's quite personal. And it's something that I'm unpacking with every damn drawing, with every piece of art that I make. At this point in my life, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I feel like I'm uncovering a little more of myself.
One of the more amazing and kind of came out of left field works for me, but obviously not for you, were the helmets that you were making in South Africa. And I feel like they kind of deal with exactly what you're saying right now. I mean, with the medieval period and with your kind of connection with living in South Africa for a few months and that experience. There's one picture of it on the...
Yeah, there's a picture of a selfie in there or something like that.
The selfie, yeah. this is how you research from across the world from each other. Is
There it
the
is.
second
Second one.
yeah. So, and in the exhibition here we have one of the helmets, Curtis made 3, and the other 2 are actually in the new museum exhibition that was mentioned in the introduction. But and actually Curtis has a video basically of like the production and the research involved in making these helmets. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit, like what that project meant to you.
That project, this project, it comes back to Lawrence Paul, and it comes back to there's a book published by MIT Press. It's a little black book, and it goes 101 things you should know about the art world or art school or something like that. And one of the pages, it's like when you're making, don't question what it is you're making, just make it and then figure it out what it is afterwards. So these helmets, I landed in South Africa and I drove past these men who were beading, and I had researched, beading was traditionally like a woman's craft done by, especially in South Africa, done by the Zulu women and the Xhosa women. But I saw these men in groups on the sidewalk making these works, and I just said, I have to work with them in some capacity. And instantly the idea of the helmet came to mind. I don't question when an idea hits me in that, when you just, what is, okay, I don't question it. I didn't know what the helmets were really going to be about or how they were going to end up. I just knew I had to make a medieval helmet out of this beading. And through the process of then like working with beaders to find out the meaning of the different colors, I found that they were way more connected than I thought. But I'll take it further back to Lawrence Paul, Vancouver, like 2002. I've decided I want to become an artist, and I've quit doing music in like a full-time capacity, so I'm broke, and I'm in my apartment just trying to make things. And one day nothing was coming, and I go for a walk. And earlier in that week, I was at this gallery, Bushland Mowat, and they pulled out a Lawrence Paul painting, portrait of a residential schoolboy. And I'd like seen this painting, and then I started dreaming about the painting and like thinking about this work, and like maybe one day my work could feel like this, or maybe I could represent my own identity in this Western framework of portraiture stuff like that, you know, like maybe there was some connections. And nothing was coming in my studio that day, and God says, go for a walk. I go for a walk, take a route I normally don't take, and I come across this condo building, glass, beautiful glass out, like panels out front, and I'm looking in, I'm like, man, the guy owns a lot of Lawrence Pauls. Like, who is this person? And I look deeper in, and it's Lawrence, and he's painting. And so I knock on the window, and he comes over, and Lawrence is a bit of a curmudgeon, understandably so. He grew up in like, he's probably in his like 70s now, but he grew up in Canada, in BC, through residential school and all these messed up things. And he's a little salty with certain people. And I was like, man, you're one of my favorite painters. I've been having dreams of this painting. Can I study with you? And it took some convincing, but eventually he said yes. That was the trigger for me, just to trust the instinct. So my practice is completely guided by like, okay, whatever this gut is saying, I'm just going to do it. So that's how, like, I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's how the helmets came to be. It was just, I wanted to work with these men. I knew there was something important that we could do together. And then these helmets came of it, because then I really started researching the armor during this time in South Africa. And protection, the idea of beading for protection, and the things that these men who are facing terrible situations in South Africa, how their partners and their wives would make them these beaded objects to go out into the world and protect themselves. So I thought about these knights leaving Africa, coming to Europe, coming to Spain, Portugal, all these places, and the beading following them.
Yeah, I mean, those ones to me are so interesting because there is a kind of vision of different things in terms of like the level of research that you do about your work, but also the kind of local collaboration and connection with people, and then again, as you say, like your apprenticeship too, like things coming back and pulling through, I think I just lost my train of thought. I don't remember what the question was going to be, so I'll
move to the next.
Yeah, and then I'll remember it.
And how much time do we have for?
About an hour.
Okay, so just for questions or anything like that, if there are any of us. 5 minutes.
There's 20 minutes more.
Oh,
Oh,
great,
cool.
okay, that's fine. Great.
What's your next one?
Well, I wanted to talk about the Nubian series because it's something actually that you've been doing for a long time.
Mhm.
It's like a series that's ongoing, and it's these are the works that are predominantly in ring boxes, the ones that are monochrome, black on black. So there's a few examples of that. Well, here's one.
Venus.
Yeah, the Venus one. And this is something that I guess you've been doing since 2014 or something, 2013.
Yeah.
This series of these kind of imagined scenes, black on black. I'm curious to know kind of what initiated that. You have kind of like, Nubian origin story according to the artist, these imagined kind of alternative narratives, which I find really interesting. And so my question's long about the Nubian works. So one is...
You want to two-part it?
Yeah, I'm going to two-part. Well, one is about... I'm going to say it at the same time. You can answer one or both.
Okay.
Or not. One is about black as a formal choice, and if that meant anything to you as just the color itself as an aesthetic. But and then also the idea as like, just because again, like I was like referencing a lot of like Stuart Hall when I was trying to think through your work for this exhibition, but thinking about the idea of like black too, and as a kind of constructed colonial identity is something that's playing on the idea of like a homogenous identity that's fixed, and in fact he's saying that we should be complicating the idea of that identity because it in fact is a construct. And does that play into the Nubian work? Because the nature of these kind of nuanced, imaginative, complicated, but historically relevant stories that are on these boxes, in fact, are kind of arguing what he argues too about creating these identities that kind of debunk the homogeneity of these identity categories.
I wasn't like, when I started making the black works, the Nubian works, it was for two reasons. Kerry James Marshall and Picasso. I loved hearing Picasso talk of. There's three things I like hearing Picasso talk about. I'd rather just look at Picasso's and not so much hear him talk so much, not all the time. But how he spoke about black and how the richness and how many variations on black. Like there's few blacks that I've ever seen in the paintings that feel as rich and deep as his. And Kerry James Marshall was the second person who I saw black in at work, and it was just like, oh. And Kerry James did this scene of lovers in bed, and it's all in tones of black. And it's so detailed, high heels under bed, the embrace between, everything is just, it's a beautiful room, but then it's just these shades of black, and that was it for me. I wanted to pay homage to Kerry James, and I also wanted to figure out how many different types of blacks I could make. And when I made the first few, the reaction I got, I loved the fact that depending on who I showed it to, and it was often based on color, that people would be like, this is a scary setting because it's dark. And that always baffled me. I'm like, there's a guy rowing a beautiful boat to his dream villa, like his dream, these manifestation pieces I make, or like the Venus, she's gorgeous, she looks like Serena Williams, like, but there would be this, oh, it's scary, that's so dark. Were you angry? Were you, like, no, what are you talking about?
And it's like these learned instincts.
Yeah, these learned instincts, and so that fascinated me, and so then that allowed me to play with the stories a bit. But again, when I first started, it was just for like wanting to pay homage to Kerry, and through the miniatures were always this thing that I did because I was scared to paint. I was scared to call myself a painter, because making that much black on a canvas, you better know how to use the brush. I had all these preconceived notions about painting that have since been removed and continue to be removed, but it was my exploration of how can I just figure out black through these dioramas, and then once I started to see the reaction to them, that's when I started to really clue into like, oh, I can tell this story using this color, and it's going to get a way different reaction.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because Kerry James too, like those paintings are incredible in how productive they are in like such a monochrome palette. And yours is similar in that way. And when you think about, I mean, I don't know if he's directly commenting on it, but just the kind of development of photography and how it was initially kind of developed to best show white skin and kind of counter in that way of looking in his paintings and in these works also, adjusting your eye to look at things a little bit differently and how productive that is. Toyin does that. Odutola, yeah, she does that really well. I mean, and she does it white on white too, and black on black, and you almost look like you're walking up to a white sheet of paper sometimes, and it's so intricate and challenging. Even the way we just like look at color and aesthetic and the way we read visually is really interesting amongst the three of you, I think. So it's nice. That's nice that you look at Carrie James that way. And I'm surprised actually that you say that about the scale too, because this is so intricate. It's not, and you're painting in this. It's not.
But
like
I feel like it's like, like I realize that now. Now I try to put but at the time it was just like, well, if it's small, it's not painting. If it's tiny brush strokes, it's not painting, and it's just then it's not. If it's not on canvas, then it's not painting. It's the whole idea of the stretched canvas and how daunting that could be.
Yeah.
But again, that's why part of the reason why I don't stretch the canvas. And I prefer it to be raw, and I prefer it to be I prefer that at this point.
It's more flexible.
Yeah, I do like when on a stretched canvas, the rhythm you can get. I like the bounce back and things like that. But that is, it's another thing.
No, it's interesting how we categorize things too, because this is just like a side joke. But I remember a friend of mine was installing one of those like Klaus Altenberg burgers or something, and he didn't hang anything behind it, and he was like, "This is a painting," and I was like, and we just think it's a sculpture. He's like, "It's canvas and paint, these things take different shapes, and so for you, it's similar in that you're just like, oh, it's not a painting, but you're a painting."
I was still calling my drawings, even though they start with watercolor stick, but I'm using a brush. I was still not calling them paintings.
It's so funny. And you were in Pikes. You were an artist in residence at Pioneer Works for 8-9 months or something, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there you were also started making charcoal.
Yes.
You? And then are any of the works in this one with the made charcoal?
Yes. All of the works from Pioneer Works from that time period that I made in New York.
So the ancestor.
The ancestor drawings are all made from I got into making bigger logs of charcoal just to get different markings. The works in South Africa are done with charcoal from the sacred site where where they communicate with ancestors. I can't remember, his name escapes me, but he's a folkloric legend in South Africa where he predicted 9/11 long before it happened. And there's a cave that he has on the site where he go in, and he made this painting in the 80s of New York with the towers and the plane, and it's super crazy. He was speaking about AIDS coming to Africa long before they started calling it AIDS and things like this, and he has a story about how AIDS is going to sweep through his people, and so they have this urn that where they make offerings, not sacrificial like human beings or anything like that. And I got some of this charcoal, and I was asking a sangoma. A sangoma is a religious, a shaman in South Africa, and how you become a sangoma is you have to have a dream of the person you're supposed to mentor with. And so I had my dream of Lawrence. And so we had these connections where when I met the sangoma, they said, well, if you were to come into my house, I would have to perform the same rituals that I would if another sangoma would come to my house. Your drawings that you're doing, you're trying to connect to this. So this is impepo. Burn this under your drawings and watch the smoke as it rises, and as maybe some ash collects on the image, start to work from that. And so some of the works from South Africa are based around that kind of idea. Yeah. So burning the wood, making my own charcoals and materials is something I really enjoy.
And so I guess I'm thinking of a way for who knows what's on that. There is in all of your work this kind. I go back to the idea of time and the kind of reflexivity of time in your work and collapsing of different references that are up against each other from the past and from the present, which is something you were doing for years, from your first. Even
in music, though.
Yeah.
It's the same. It was the same in music.
Yeah, and your early ring boxes and things like that. And then there's a funny thing. There's another essay in this little booklet by a woman named Nomi Duma, who's a scholar in New York, and she's written about some sculptures that Curtis made for this exhibition. And she wrote it in advance of them even being made because they were made this week. And it was just based on conversations of like basically about history. The three of us like sitting in New York and just like talking about these kind of the research that Curtis was doing and how even like in the way the exhibition manifested there was kind of a play with time, right? Like she wrote about these objects based on the research that you and in advance of even like seeing the works, which is really interesting. I don't know if you want to talk about that research or that kind of like what your instinct is to kind of think about the present up against the past
Well,
and the distant past.
I'll make this kind of condensed. It was something as simple as like years ago, early internet days, PBS on their website, they had a letter written from National Geographic apologizing for their archaeologists back in the day purposely destroying the noses of sculptures to mask the identity of the ethnicity of who the sculptures were representing. And this stuck with me. This was before I was making visual art or even into this sort of thing. This just froze with me. And I would go back to this and look at this, but I didn't think, oh, how am I ever going to use this information? So I didn't print it up. So when we went to search for it online, we can't find it. But an artist who I met yesterday, he's like, I'm going to show you how to bring up the archives from the PBS website. They store them every year, every couple of years, and maybe we can find this information. And that always just fascinated me because I remember it distinctly in school, we had to do a thing where we're like, okay, we're going to draw the Sphinx. And it would always be like these really European faces. Everybody assumed that the noses were broken off were almost like just like the Greek sculptures. And as we find out, a lot of the white sculptures in the Met were painted various colors, and there were people of color as well, and they've literally been washed off. So the noses were something that I, through travels from just this year in Venice, seeing the Senegalese man selling bags, I was always fascinated on the different nose shapes throughout Africa, from the Egyptians, Ethiopia, just all over. And so these noses, I wanted to begin to like replace these noses. And my goal is to like do a large public sculpture of these noses, of different noses from people from all over the world. And I just, there's something about the shape. As I began to sculpt these noses, I was like, first I called her, I'm like, oh my God, these aren't working, because they kept just turning into phalluses. I was like, I'm just making a table full of these, like what's going on? But then as I start to really look at the nose and uncovering more and more, I've just, like, there's such a beautiful shape when separated from the object, and so there's a way to tie it back into my interest in Egypt and the past like that, but then also I'm discovering I'm just fascinated. I love drawing people's noses.
And it's true, because when you go to any major museum that has, you see a lot of these sculptures with the noses cut off, and it's something that you become accustomed to seeing also. So it's the way we look at them is like expecting that piece will be missing. And similarly, like with the reference like the Greek sculptures too, and there's I can't remember her name, but this woman is doing a lot of research now on how the fact that we look at Greek and Roman sculptures completely white has affected our perceptions of the past and make us think that Greece and Italy at the time was white, and it wasn't. It was very multicultural, and there were a lot of people from the Middle East and Africa living there, and that in fact that kind of lack of education in the museum displays and the way we communicate these things. It kind of contributes in a sense to like visual white supremacy.
And I was just gonna say, for me living in the States, it's like, now please like take what I'm gonna say in Trump's ideology and most European institutions' ideology behind art. Well, Trump's a little crude, much cruder, and not as refined as these works, but they kind of feed the same ideology, and that is, it's making it hard for me to just go and enjoy the works that I used to enjoy, because I feel like I'm missing out on a whole section of life that should also be included and not just cast aside as primitive works or things of that nature. I just like think there's so much. We're all as artists. Like I can't not believe that that's not. I have to believe that the Da Vinci is in Venice at this time, and he's also being inspired by great Muslim artists and great African artists, and I have to feel that these ideas have always been shared and not so. And
they have been shared, and it's just, I think it's once you understand like that kind of museum pedagogy, museum display,
Chinese artists and Japanese artists,
kind of
and
separates things out in these ways, so that you can continue to think about these categories in these ways. It's very important to be aware of that. That's the way we're looking at them in these kinds of contexts. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. How
It's okay to go to questions.
yeah, let's go to
sure,
questions.
sure.
I feel like that would be, if there are any. Bueller? Anyone? Yes?
The plaster on the wall that you incorporated on one of your pictures. I was curious about the background. What inspires you to look at a blank wall and apply paint on it? Peeling plaster on the wall.
Oh, okay. I used to in my bedroom there was the window, and it was like that lead paint that could break off really easy, and I used to pick at the paint, and it'd be like, oh, that's a body shape, or that's a. I've always seen images in, like, I think that everyday life and nature and the New York subway, and I think it might have been like Rauschenberg who said it, but those are some of the greatest paintings. Those are some of the greatest mark makings. Those things that are worn down by time or flaked away, that's where I feel like the true image emerges. If I try to look at someone and draw them, I'm better off looking at like everything else around them to create them than staring right at them. So that is always, I've always looked at those stucco ceilings and seen drawings in them and things like that.
I was wondering if there is any relationship in your work between restitution and abandonment. The abandonment, the belief that the temporality of the activity drives you to the point of the unfinished, and then you move on. And the sculptures whose noses you're doing a replacement on, which seems to be a difference to an original completeness that you're somehow trying to restore. How do those two things work together?
Wow. Okay. In regards to the noses, because I can't answer that, because I'm still like I'm still in the process of understanding the noses, and I'm still not happy with how they connect to the original object. Like even physically, I'm still like something is not lining up, but this is the prototype. Could you please repeat the first question you had, the first part of that? Just about temporality?
Well, in the notion of the unfinished, I was thinking about
Yeah.
Paul Valéry, who says a poem is never complete, it is simply abandoned.
Yeah.
So that moment of abandonment, which
Yeah.
was recognizing that the time had come,
Yeah.
and the time was calling the shots in terms of your either continuing engagement or you're walking away from the project in the knowledge of its incompleteness. That seems to be something that where the process is there, but and then you move on. So that's a linearity that's moving forward all the time. There is a circularity to the restorative process, and it seems to me that those symbolic geometries are talking to each other in a way that seems to be really, really interesting, because to use the notion of conflict and collision again, it seems to be two radically located practices in different forms of endeavor, with these two targets of the infinitely serial and the closure that comes with the circularity of restoration.
That's really nice.
That is beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, that is something that, like, wow. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that, because the noses are so new. Because the concept and everything I'm working behind that, I haven't really brought that to completion in my mind of what it is I'm doing with that. And to juxtapose that with the, and now, yeah, you've given me a lot to think about. Yeah, thank you. I don't think I have an answer for you for that. Yeah.
Are the noses just the nose?
Just
Or
the nose.
They're not on a sculpture?
No, they're not. No, just the nose. Yeah. Because if you want to know why, originally the idea was to 3D scan, go into museums, 3D scan the objects that the noses were, and then try to build and rematch. That felt very limiting to me, because as I began to see that, well, wait, first I was interested in Nigerian noses and these noses from this area of the Middle East, but then I'm interested in noses in general. So now it's removing itself from having to go back to that Egyptian sculpture, and just how we, I think about Michael Jackson a lot, and the role that his nose played in his life, you know, and the trauma around that. Noses are new, so I'm still unpacking.
You seem to have a very creative relationship, and I very much appreciate feeling that by listening to you talk like this, going back and forth. You brought up the idea of the institution, and you seem to be very thankful of, you know, working here, that you were enabled to work through whatever it is you're going to be doing, and that also sort of evoking the idea of the institution as something that was really very often a very closed and rigid kind of a thing that could only sort of stymie you in some ways. And the trajectory that you've taken in your career has been sort of cagey with regard to institutions.
I've avoided the institution.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I can see that. And so I think of you as being very interesting, especially coming from inside the institution as we are here. And as you are in many ways, right? And so it struck me that I very much appreciate this kind of relationship that you have. And I wonder if you can say anything about, like, what do you get out of this relationship that you have with the curator? What do you get out of the artist? And what kind of, like, how is that creative? And how can you listen to each other? How has she affected your work? How has he affected your work?
Okay. You want to go first? Because I can go first. I know, I've thought about this a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like I've found my Brad Smith. Brad was the guy that I would play G.I. Joes with for hours, and we could be creative together. She is able to push my work in ways that doesn't damage my fragile artist ego. She's able to speak to me in a way that I'm like definitely going to consider, where other people are like, I don't know, you know. She finds a way to be like, well, you know, I've seen enough of your work to maybe that this isn't the best. And maybe that, I know you've been talking to me about your parents, you've just been talking about, oh, you can't wait to go back home to Trinidad to your parents. Maybe this drawing, you include that feeling. It's been one of the few people in music, you collaborate with a lot of people, and I left music so I could just be with myself. And I find that, and because she's studying the things that about identity and race, and in a way that I don't have the energy to do that. I want to make. Leah would be like, well, are you going to go help? I want to make. I want to be in the studio all the time. But I understand that there has to be thought and theory behind what I'm doing. And so I'm like, Mags, this is what I'm riffing on. Have you come across anything? And she'll send me the perfect quote to be like, oh, that's what I'm going to title this piece. So it's been that sort of relationship where she's made me a better artist because of her understanding of the other side of me.
That's so nice. Yeah, for me, I mean, I think I really like Curtis's work. For me, it's like for me, it's so expansive and so challenging, and it's not easy to think about, and it's not easy to write about, which I think is a great thing. It means that it's challenging a lot of things that we're used to doing or seeing. I think I also believe in a type of curating that most of the work happens on the front end, and the exhibition is just a kind of like glimpse into a bigger working relationship. So a lot of it is like, I mean, I think that we've hit a point now where we're like collaborating and always talking and things like that, and it's really, I'm like, you know, I'm so grateful for it because it's really inspiring and challenging for me too, because I get really heady and I really get caught up in these theories sometimes, and then it helps me to really just, you know, look at work and like look at creation and look at the kind of materials of it, and that's the perfect balance. And but I do think that in terms of like the way, just to go back to the way I think about curating is that I hope to continue to, like I've invested already in Curtis's work, and I'll stick with him like throughout my career, and those are the kind of relationships I like to have with artists. I like to just continue to learn more and delve more deeply into their work, and continue to work together, and let that be a way that we both grow, that the work can grow, and that my writing can grow, or my curatorial approach can grow just by the challenges that we offer each other. And like as you said, the Whitney program, and that's a very strange program where curators are working alongside artist studios, and that almost never happens. So you're kind of, so I feel really lucky that I've had a relationship like this with Curtis, and then also, you know, other artists, just being around them and learning the kind of strategies of like foregrounding an artist's work, and how do curators facilitate spaces that allow artists to show their work in a way that is most true to what they're doing, rather than true to, you know, whatever theme I'm thinking of that day, or the market, which I'm not very good at, but it's just anyway, that was like a long-winded, just because it's kind of part of like the way I think about curating. But for me, the challenge of Curtis's work and the kind of multiple like colliding dialogues that occur in it are just kind of endlessly rich for me to work with. And he's like down for anything too, so it's good.
Like, let's do it.
Do you want
All
to
right.
go a week earlier and make some sculptures?
Let's do it.
He did, so I'm happy to work with someone who's as enthusiastic as me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you. And thanks to the university for having us. It's like I've said, it's been an incredible experience, and you're talking to a person who left school in like grade 9 because I was like tired of being told I wasn't smart and the way I learned was wrong, and finding mentors and people to tell me the exact opposite. So thank you for making it. Thanks. Awesome. Thanks.
That was my
Like the Greek filled out time. Double dude.
I saw you walking down the
It's like, it's not, so it's nice to.
So I'm interested in
That's awesome. Yeah. Let's have a